Okay, the headline over the last 24 hours has been that 20% of Trump supporters are against freeing the slaves. And the implication is sort of that they want there still to be slaves. And there's now some controversy over that's really what the data says. The data comes from a YouGov poll about the beliefs of Republican voters. And the YouGov data does say that about 20% of Donald Trump's voters disagree with the freeing of slaves in southern states after the Civil War via the Emancipation Proclamation of Abraham Lincoln. Now, when you actually look at the data, I think we should just really think about this to figure out what this means. The way the poll was worded, first it asks, are you in favor or against the use of executive action by presidents or whatever? And then it asks about some specific executive actions. And then it says, do you agree or disagree with Abraham Lincoln's executive action via the Emancipation Proclamation to free the slaves? And indeed, 1 in 5 Trump supporters says, no, I don't agree with that. So the headline has been 20% of Trump supporters don't think the slaves should have been freed. Is that really representative of what they think, Lewis? Or is the reality that they were sort of prepared and set up with the initial questions about executive orders to then say, I don't believe that there should be slaves necessarily, but I don't like executive order being used. I think that some other mechanism should have been used to free the slaves or something. I don't know. I've seen the headline. I've seen what the poll says. I get it, but maybe it's a little bit of a distortion. I don't know.
I don't like the way the question is worded. I think if you're going to ask questions of the general public, they can't be worded that way. You need to word them much more simply. And so if
in other words, should you be allowed to own slaves?
Is that what the question was? Or was the, yeah, you're right, because there is some confusion. Or was the question, are you against an executive order
right
that did that?
Now in the defense of the headlines, Lewis, right? Marco Rubio's supporters were asked the exact same questions. And instead of 1 out of 5 saying, I disagree with the Emancipation Proclamation's usage to free the slaves, only 1 out of 20 of Rubio supporters, right? 5% of Rubio supporters said the same thing. So unless Donald Trump voters are just that much more against executive actions conceptually, there may be some case here that there are more Trump voters who are in favor of slavery. And to be honest, that wouldn't be shocking. I can still have a problem with the way this poll is worded and not be surprised that it's the Trump voters that are the most racist and xenophobic and nativist.
Yeah, well, if we look at footage from Trump rallies where we have BLM protesters and we see how they're treated,
yeah,
I guess you could look at those videos very carefully and see what percentage of people think that slavery might be a good thing.
I think that even if the phrasing is somewhat misleading, the margin between 20% of Trump supporters being against the freeing of the slaves and 5% of Rubio supporters being against the freeing of the slaves, that does tell us something. And I think that that should really be the focus, aside from whether you think that the wording was misleading. But this is why it's really important. And this is just a basic media literacy thing. When you see a poll that says anything about any group of people, pull up the methodology. Because if you pull up the methodology of the YouGov poll and you see that before the specific question about the Emancipation Proclamation, there are 2 questions about executive orders more generally, and that Republican voters are very, very primed right now, particularly because of the propaganda around President Obama's usage of executive orders, just to resist and repel anything that has that name on it. We have to be a little more nuanced in our analyses here.
Agreed. And YouGov may not have even realized what they were doing when they compiled these questions. But still, yes, you have to investigate that.
Gamefly is sort of like Netflix for video games. They have over 8,000 new and classic games for Xbox One, Xbox 360, PS4, PS3, Wii, and a bunch of other platforms. And you can play as many games as you want for 1 monthly fee. And if you find some games you want to keep, you can buy them for a low used price. There's never any due dates or late fees. And our audience can get a free 30-day trial at gameflyoffer.com/TDPS. The games are shipped directly to you with return envelopes included. There's no contracts, and you can rent games through the mobile app. Get the free 30-day trial for the David Pakman Show audience and support our show by going to gameflyoffer.com/TDPS.